Okay. And then, yeah.
Okay.
So
Let me just introduce you, Bart.
yes,
Yep.
yes, you can do
Or
that.
do you want to do something
No, that's
before the
fine.
introduction?
That's fine. You can introduce me.
I met Bart. Is it jou?
Zo. Ik ben zo met eiken. Ei. Oké.
Ja, dat is niet.
Kijk, zie je eind. Jullie waren in deze
Okay, thank you everybody for coming. I'm very pleased to have Bart here and his wife Petra. So Bart's been involved with Gornongosa National Park in Mozambique for what, 20 years?
20 years.
20 years.
Next May.
Okay. And the way we met is through iNaturalist. So we're both active there. Bart has many more records than I have in places like Angola, Mozambique, Zimbabwe, and he's also one of the people behind Flora of Mozambique and Flora of Zimbabwe, which are excellent websites, particularly for the quality of photography and all the other information he puts on it. I've been taking them around. Bart asked me if I could take him to Johannesburg and Waterberg, and Waterberg lived up to its name. We got very wet.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And Bart is, well, both of them are from Belgium, but Bart spends a lot of his time in Africa, particularly Mozambique, obviously. So I'll hand over to you. Thank you, Bart.
Okay, well, thank you. What I wanted to do first, before I start the sort of little casual PowerPoint thing, is to show you the Zimbabwe flora and tell you a little bit of the history, how that came about. So I would move the mouse here. Zimbabwe flora. There we go, straight away. So this is the homepage of the Zimbabwe flora. I'm kind of proud to say that that was the first online flora that ever existed. In 2002, a friend of ours in Harare started a checklist of Zimbabwean plants and had the idea to put it online. And at the same time, we were in Vumba, we lived in Vumba in Zimbabwe, and got really impressed by the forests in the Vumba Mountains and the ferns and the orchids there. And I started on my computer a little checklist with photographs and links of what was happening there. And then I started doing a little bit more in Zimbabwe. And in 2003, Mark Hyde, the guy who was doing the checklist, and we met and found out we were more or less doing the same thing, and decided to join forces and put it online as a real online flora where you can go to a family, and you've got a list of families here, and you can just choose any family. Let's just do Apocinaceae since we have an Apocinaceae person here. And then you get a list of all the genera, and with all the genera you can get all the you can get the species, and for each species basically there is a page that will give you photographs and will give you a description and other information that is necessary. It'll give you a list of literature references, and we'll have a list of records that we have in our database for that, and that obviously with some that's only a few, and with some it might be a hell of a lot. And we even have from that map, from those records, we can create little distribution maps for Zimbabwe, and that way you can see where the plants can be found. Obviously, these little distribution maps can be very incomplete because we only have a few records, but there might be more. And with others, we have quite comprehensive maps throughout the country, because in the years after we started, Petra and I and Mark spent a lot of time traveling through Zimbabwe collecting records. Petra took care of all the ferns. She's the fern queen of Africa. We even have another website, a separate one that will give you the possibility to look at each country in Africa and create a checklist of the ferns with information and photographs on these ferns, wherever possible. So this is what we've been doing. It started out as a little bit of a fun hobby, and got a bit out of hand. And so what happened then was that in 2006, I went with two people from Zimbabwe. We went to Mozambique to go birding. Had nothing to do with plants, and we decided that we were going to go to Mount Gornongosa to try and see the green-headed oriole, and go to Gornongosa for the last couple of days and do some bird watching there. And something really strange happened then, because there was a guy, a rich American guy, who had been to Gornongosa and had fallen in love with the place, even though it was completely in ruins, and decided to pledge his vision, his time, and a lot of his fortune to basically rebuild Gornongosa into the park that it was in the 60s and 70s, when it was one of the most beautiful and one of the most diverse parks in Africa. So if I can find the PowerPoint now, where it is, then we'll go on to the PowerPoint, and then I can continue from there. Oh, it built. All right. Right, so here we are. That is where Gornongosa is in Mozambique, sort of more or less in the dead center of it. You can spin Mozambique around on the axle of Gornongosa National Park, and the other little map there is the park. The purple areas are the buffer zone around the park, where a lot of communities live, that we have built a good relationship with, and a lot of education projects and health projects and other projects are going on in all these communities to help the community, and a lot of people find work directly or indirectly through the Gornongosa National Park. The separate part in the northwest is Mount Gornongosa. Mount Gornongosa is a whole different sort of area, but we've tried to, as much as possible, include it into the protection of the park, because all the water that the park relies on comes from Mount Gornongosa. All the rivers that start in Gornongosa have their origin on Mount Gornongosa, which goes up to 1,854 meters above sea level. Gornongosa, on the contrary, is an extremely low-lying basin, most of it, with a little bit of an escarpment on both sides. What happens is that Gornongosa really is the most southern tip of the Great African Rift Valley that starts up in the north in Ethiopia and Kenya and comes all the way down. And the last sliver before it ends up in the Indian Ocean is basically what Gornongosa is. So we have a low-lying area, although it's like 250 kilometers from the ocean. In the central part, it's only about 15 meters above sea level, 1.5. So it's very, very low. And it's all alluvial soils. A very large part, central part of the park floods every year. There's a lake in the middle called Lake Urema, and that lake will flood. Uh, I would say probably more than 50% of the central part of the park. So for right now, the park is closed. When I was there just a couple of weeks ago, I left on the 14th, and on the 15th, the last people left, and the park is now closed until mid-March, maybe 1st of April, because it's just too wet to do anything. So for the public, you can't drive. You can drive to the base camp, to the central camp, but you can't go anywhere from there because it's all underwater. This picture is almost literally a dream come true, because I told you about the man who had the dream to re-establish this park. And 20 years ago, there was pretty much no game whatsoever in the park anymore. During the war in Mozambique, it had all been poached out, and there was really nothing left. Infrastructure was completely destroyed. And buffalo were down to zero. In the 60s and 70s, Gornongosa National Park was known for its vast herds of buffalo roaming the floodplains because there is ideal grasslands for them in the dry season to live off. But there were no buffaloes anymore. So one of the things that happened in the early days of the restoration was that animals were reintroduced and buffalo were reintroduced. And I took this picture on the 13th of December, so a couple of weeks, 2 weeks ago, and we saw a herd of over 100 buffalo on the floodplain where they used to be in the 60s and 70s. And this is what it was all about, to bring this sort of thing back. Buffalo are not in the majority anymore. The majority goes to other animals that are even more numerous. But like predators have all been reintroduced. We have a very healthy population of wild dog. We probably have the second largest population of wild dog at the moment after Botswana. Hyenas have been reintroduced. Leopard has been reintroduced, and they're all doing well. Lions have more or less come back on their own. There were very, very few lions left. And I remember the only way to see a lion in 2006 was because there were two males and they were brothers, and one of them was missing a leg because of a snare. There was only 3 legs, and the other brother literally took care of him and hunted for him. And so they were always easy to find because they weren't very mobile. And now we have a really healthy population of lion again, almost too healthy, I would say. So botanizing has become a lot more difficult since 2006, because we have lion and we have hyenas and wild dogs. We have a good population of elephant, which also came back mostly by itself, slowly. Elephants are still, the bigger bulls like this one are more or less approachable if they feel like it. But the female herds are still a thing to watch out for, because they still remember that people were always shooting at them, and they're usually not happy to see us. Most antelope, more species even than this, all came back by themselves without having to be reintroduced. Slowly, numbers recuperated. And the prize goes to waterbuck. It is the ideal habitat for waterbuck, that floodplain, in both dry and wet times. And the number of waterbuck we have in the park is 65,000 at the moment. And it's not something we have to worry about, because we have the predators, we have the space, we have the food, and every now and again when there's a bad year in the range, yes, probably a lot of them will die, like that happens in nature, and it will recuperate. But sort of the mass of animals that probably buffalo and a few other like zebra and wildebeest, which are also back, were in the old days, has been taken over by waterbuck. When you work there, you become a bit blasé, because you see waterbuck every day, all day, and everywhere. But I cannot help myself, but every time I go to the floodplain and I see a picture like this, then I'm still pretty emotional. So apart from the restoration of the park and the wildlife, another thing that is fantastic about the whole park is that we've set up a science and education center, which is not only meant for foreign students to come and do their PhD, we have cooperations with many universities, but it's mainly used to give Mozambican students the chance to get studies, get courses, and even a full master program has been going on for the last 10 years, I think so, where every 2 years we have a group of Mozambican students to do a master's degree in natural history or and ecology studies there. I mean, look at this classroom. This is when I do identification, field identification courses there every year, and this is my classroom. So, and with my students there. Um, it's a wonderful place because we got this whole science center set up. We have a herbarium there. We have entomological collections there. We even have a DNA lab where the DNA machines that we have are more up to date than the ones we have in the Botanical Institute in Belgium. So it's all very much state of the art that we can do there, thanks to a lot of funding still from the project, but also a lot of external funding that we get, because if a project is successful, then countries and organizations are always more eager to put their money into that as well. So we have a lot of donors that help us set up these education programs. Here, these are two very nice pictures because the people on the right side, they are now teaching other students how to deal with birds and measuring birds and netting and identifying birds and everything. And the two people doing it, the guy in the middle and the woman who has the nightjar in her hand, are both former students who are now educated enough and now have their own degrees and are now actually teaching the courses that they were part of maybe 7 years ago. The woman on the left is an absolute angel. Petra and I found her, what was it, in 2019. We did a course. We did one of the identification courses. She was on the course and then later on applied for an internship, and we trained her to basically take over the herbarium and take over the botany in the park. And Petra already doesn't come anymore because she feels like everything that she could do, Francesca can do better. And I'm more and more feeling like I'm on my last courses there as well, because she is quite qualified to take over these courses that I've been doing there. So, which is a wonderful thing. Then another thing is a separate little conservation project that is going on in Gornongosa as well, is that we have contacts throughout the country where people who are illegally trading, poaching and catching pangolins are caught, and the pangolins then get confiscated. They are brought to Gornongosa and they are then rehabilitated and put back into the wild whenever that's possible, sooner or later. And we shouldn't tell anybody, but we probably have the most dense population of pangolins in the world right now, because all the caught pangolins end up somewhere in Gorongosa National Park, roaming around where there's good food for them and where they're well protected and where they can live their lives in peace. So then we get to the park. These are pictures of the Urema floodplain. It's all a bit compressed on that side. But so Urema floodplain is, the central part is a lake that is perennial. It's a perennial lake. And it floods every year over very, very large areas that then become very fertile once the water again recedes and are able to feed these 65,000 waterbuck and all the other animals that are in the park. One of the fascinating things there is this species called Phaidobia albida. Some of you may know it. These ghostly forests that you see from the air are not dead trees. They are actually all Phaidorbias, and they have a very interesting evolutionary adaptation because they have valves in their root system that they can close off. So when the ground floods and other trees it's impossible for trees to grow there because it's too much flooded. In those areas, Phaidobia can still grow because they will close their valves and hibernate while the water is high, and then when the water goes down again, they get their new leaves and they will get their flowers and they will get their fruits. So these ghostly forests are not dead, but they are hibernating. And that makes that their cycle is completely opposite to everything else in the park. Because everything else is dry and barren in the dry season, and everything comes back to life and is green in the rainy season. And these trees do it exactly the other way around. In the wet season, they are hibernating, and then they will get their flowers and their fruits and their new leaves once the waters are receding and it gets drier. Another little thing on the floodplain that we have, which is actually an endemic, a narrow endemic only in that northern part, floodplain part of the park, is another acacia. It's Facellia torre. It's just a shrubby thing, a very, very densely glandular shrub, and it only occurs on the north side of the park and nowhere else in the world. This is another little plant that grows there. It's also an endemic. Might not look very sensational. It looks like about 150 other little asteraceae, but it is completely unique to that area. It only grows in those floodplain areas after the waters recede. With all the game, we obviously have a very, very varied bird life as well. This picture always reminds me a bit of Michelangelo's Last Supper painting. And because, like I said, in bad years, a lot of animals die in dry season, and even in good years, there are now enough predators to make it a good breakfast for vultures and marabous, etc. So we have very, very healthy populations of vultures, and particularly white-headed vultures, which are getting extremely rare and critically endangered in most parts of Africa. We have the largest breeding population of white-headed vultures in Gornongosa National Park. Then from that floodplain, around the floodplain, you have large areas that do not flood, completely flood, so trees can grow there, but the soil is alluvial and it gets inundated in water in the rainy season a lot. And there's a lot of these little rivers like the Musikatsi River that grow into those areas. And those areas are all sort of mixed deciduous woodlands with too many species to name. There's lots of Combretum there, there's several Facellias and Senegalias there. There's lots of different stuff. And these woodlands is where most of the antelope that are not on the floodplain can be found. And we also have a very healthy population of crocodiles in those rivers and around the lake. And Facellia Santofleia is one of the trees that is very, very common in Gornongosa National Park. We literally have whole forests, or whole areas where almost all the trees are these yellow fever trees. One of the reasons we have so many of these trees is that for 20 odd years there were hardly any elephants in the park that could pull them over and eat the seedlings and destroy them. And a lot of the trees now are of a size, they still manage to topple them every now and again, but obviously not in the big numbers they would if they were small. So we still have a lot of these big trees and big forests that are not so damaged because of the lack of elephants for a long time, and now the elephants are back. I told you there's lots of crocodiles, big ones. As I was just there recently, the big bull elephant had died in the Musikadzi River there, more or less where you saw that picture. And crocodiles, there's the guy, the photographer who works there regularly, he put cameras up there, and he has a photo of a crocodile. You can see it on Facebook if you look it up. He has a photo of a crocodile that basically is climbing onto the dead elephant, and it is about the same size as the elephant. And it's like his head is with the head of the elephant, and the tail is further down than the end of the elephant. So they are big there. And they managed, he was obviously not alone, there were many of them, and in 2 weeks, the elephant was completely gone. There was nothing left. There's absolutely nothing left except the skull. Everything else was gone. Bird life, as I said, fish eagles, of course, and kingfishers, everything is there. If you are, this is the same Musikadzi River in the low. In the low, water just runs out for a couple of months, and then comes back again from when the water rises. We've got these big lianas there in the riverine forest called Entada reedii. This particular one in the top corner there stretches, it's still there. It stretches over more than 40 meters, and all over the trees and in the trees, and the smaller branches are these corkscrew things that you see there, and the fruit are among the biggest fruit that you can find in nature. They're beans. They are typical entadas. They eventually disintegrate. Each segment basically falls out, and only the rim will remain. And if you've ever been to the beach, even here, you'll find these big black seeds on the beaches. That's this thing here. That's Entada reedii. So this is a bit of the open deciduous woodlands. You see in the range there's lots of smaller and larger pans there that provide a lot of water and go down again. There is like massive colonies of frogs that breed in those pans and every year, and lots of interesting bird life going on, and it's obviously for the animals it's a good source as well. One of the most fascinating trees in those woodlands, I find, is Sterculia appendiculata. It just feels like it doesn't belong there. It's about 3 times the size of every other tree in the whole park. It sticks out above everything, but it's indigenous. It's fairly common, and there are such beacons everywhere. I mean, even like from the air, you can see them sticking out above the woodlands. It looks like they've planted gum trees there or something. But they are indigenous trees that belong in that area. Flowers in the dry season before the range. You've got beautiful Crinum stulmannii flowering everywhere. We've got some very interesting and near endemic euphorbias. This is a tree euphorbia that's quite rare, but still you can find it regularly in the park, called Lividiflora, with both red fruits and red flowers. And then there is also this, which Peter will know. It's an interesting little plant. It's completely endemic to a small area in central Mozambique, and is only found on the edges of small pans that dry out only through evaporation. So they're clayish pans where the water cannot sink into the ground. Everything evaporates, and it makes the soil very mineral rich over a number of years, and few things can grow there. And this Halipedicola basically means saline loving. So this little Orbea grows there, and only grows in a few places where these pans are. There's only a few locations so far that I've found in the park where little colonies of this thing grow. But the funny thing is, it's a very popular one and easy to grow one in horticulture. So the collectors, every collector of stapeliads probably has Halipedicola in its collection because they grow quite easily, even though in nature they only grow in that funny specific place. So, and you can see by the flowers why this thing is so popular. It looks like some alien starfish that has washed up in the middle of Mozambique. Then some of the areas in the woodland that are slightly drier and more sandy with deeper sand, you have sand forest patches, where these secretive little red dikers still roam around. And one thing that was really nice, really exciting, because we could have been 2 days early, we were 2 days earlier, and we also came 3 days later, and there was not a flower. There was no flower in sight. This is Pterocarpus lucens, subspecies Antonesii. They, like all other pterocarpuses, they have beautiful yellow flowers, and they have masses and masses of these flowers, but it only lasts literally for 48 hours, not more. We came on a Friday, and we didn't even notice that they were going into flower because they're all sticking above in the canopy. Then we came back, I think, on Tuesday, and this happened. We had these masses and masses of really beautiful yellow trees. We came back again 2 days later, nothing, all gone. So we hit it just in the right time. It was a beautiful sight, a beautiful sight. Wrong site. Then there's a couple of endemics growing in that forest as well. One of them is Meletia mozambicensis, a small tree that only occurs in central Mozambique. Then, like I said, it is part of the Rift Valley system. So on both sides, we have an escarpment. On the western side, it goes up into dolerite, granite areas with Miombo woodland, Brachystegia burmii, and on the coastal side, on the eastern side, it goes up into a ridge which is limestone and has a very, very different vegetation. It's also largely Miombo woodland with the most massive, largest specimens of Brachystegia speciformis I've ever seen. And this limestone has its own endemics again, and it has cut out a lot of deep, deep gorges because it's a very soft stone. And in these gorges, in the rivers, there is almost untouched forest, still evergreen forest, you can see. One of the other interesting euphorbias is Euphorbia halipedicola, which grows on the edges of those cliffs of the limestone gorges, but there are also a few colonies in the alluvial parts of the park that are also a little bit more mineral rich. And what you can find there in the trees is still both species of Platycerum, of staghorn ferns, which are almost extinct in most other countries, certainly in Zimbabwe, and I don't know about South Africa, but probably not very common here. And we have two species there that are still extremely common in those Miombo woodlands. We once saw a huge tree when we were there, and it had 13 clumps of that Platycerium alcicorne, like big clumps like that, of at least 1 meter in diameter, 13 clumps in one tree. And the other one, Elephantotus, is usually a bit smaller, but is also quite impressive still. Then inside those limestone gorges, as I said, you have these beautiful little streams and rivers, and you have patches of evergreen forest where you can find another endemic euphorbia. And that's quite an interesting one, because what do euphorbias do? They are succulent because they can then store a lot of water and get through long dry seasons. And they are out in the sun where it's hot, and they contain all this moisture. Now, this is also a euphorbia, but it grows in the deep shade in the understory of forest. And so he basically, at one point, decided, like, oh, to hell with that, I don't need to be succulent. So the thing is that the branches are completely two-dimensional. They are completely flattened. They're still sort of succulent, but they're not like big square or round branches, but they're completely flattened and two-dimensional because it doesn't really have to store that much water when it's in a shaded and much moister area. And this is one of my own little pets, which grows on those limestone gorges in little areas of black soil. I found this species first in 2015, I think it was. Yeah, 2015 I found it. And I immediately thought, like, this does not look like anything I've ever seen. So it's in the family Linderniaceae, which used to be a subfamily in Scrophulariaceae, but it's now its own family, and it's about that big. I mean, the plant you see here they don't get much bigger, and it's probably about 3 centimeters tall. And so I collected a few specimens. I sent it to the #1 expert on this family, Eberhard Fischer, and he immediately agreed it's a new species. So 2 years ago we described it, and when we researched it, we found it was so much more glandular than anything else. And when we looked at the specimens under a microscope, we actually found little insects and one little spider stuck to the glands. And it suggests that maybe it is even partly carnivorous because of that glandular. So it might have enzymes that can actually have these carnivorous, basically just digest these little insects. So we're doing more research on that. We're hoping to get some live material from seeds one of these days, and then find out if it really has these enzymes that could make it. So we called it Drosseroides because that seemed to be the most apt name, because it just looks like a Drosera with the wrong flower. But just to look at this map again, we have these purple areas on the left are the escarpment with the Miombo on the left side. Then all the sort of yellow-brownish areas are the mixed woodlands that mostly get inundated but not totally flooded. And then the green parts in the middle are those areas that can flood every year when the rains are good. They flood completely, and so Lake Urema, the blue in the middle, will then practically be covering all these areas. And then on the eastern side, you have the other escarpment with the limestone gorges in red and other Miombo wood areas towards the coast, where it's running down towards the beaches. And then we have Mount Gornongosa above that to the west, which is when you are, well, in this case I was flying towards it, but when you're in the park you always see the dome of Mount Gornongosa in the distance when it's clear. And so far my story has been all positive, and Mount Gornongosa is absolutely beautiful, but we're struggling a lot more in keeping it safe. A lot of the forests, a lot of the pictures that you are going to see are disappearing or have disappeared in the last 10, 15 years. This is the Morambodzi Falls, beautiful large waterfalls surrounded by forest, but it's already a bit of an isolated pocket of forest. Some of the major trees are Newtonia buchanani. The picture on the right is from a time that we had a little digital camera and sort of composed a little panorama picture by ourselves. We did not have the Photoshop and AI yet that we can do it with now. But if you look closely, you can actually see at the bottom of the tree a little bit of red. That's a guy standing there.
Whoa.
Newtonia buchanani. It's most of the big trees, I'm afraid, are gone now. Then we have the occasional Homo sapiens entering into the park. uh, and what they were certainly in the beginning, what they were looking for was a very rare bird. It's only known from a few mountain ranges further north in Malawi and in Tanzania. And the only place in southern Africa where the true southern African birders can tick it off is in the forests of Mount Gornongosa. It's the green-headed oriole. It's not an easy bird to see, so it's a bit of a hidden photo of it, but I managed to get a shot of it at last in 22. And those forests have a few endemic plants as well. It has been less isolated. The mountain has been less isolated and not as long isolated as most of the Inselbergs in northern Mozambique, which have higher endemism because of that isolation. But it has close associations with the border highlands of Zimbabwe and Mozambique. So a lot of the species that were thought to be endemic to the border highlands before, like when I started working there, we now know they also have populations on Mount Gornongosa. So it's sort of an extra extension of those populations. But we had one true endemic when we first got there, which is this Streptocarpus brachynema. It only occurs on the mossy rocks in the shade of the forest. And a second one that John Burroughs and I found in 2007 has still not been formally described. At first it was thought by Ian Derbyshire and Kew that it may be a strange isolated population of a Tanzanian species, and he needed fruiting material to be able to describe it, hence the fact that it has not been described in the literature that has come out so far. And something funny happened, because when we were there in 22, 3 years ago, 3.5 years ago, in 22, when we went up, a lot of the forest had gone, and we kind of figured, like, okay, this species is probably gone even before we had the chance to describe it. So we went up another route. We walked up another route and stayed in more or less the same places where you stayed as well on that plateau, and spent 2 weeks there. And then Petra and I decided, whatever happens, we are going down the same way as we used to come up and down, however hard that path might be. But we are going down that same way just to see what happened to that forest and what happened to this species. And, well, most of it was a complete disaster area. There were maize fields where there used to be forest, and a lot of it had been cut. There were a few isolated pockets still there. And as we came down to about 1,100 meters, where most of the forest had been gone, there was suddenly one patch that turned out to be just too steep and too rocky to bother with to clear so far. I mean, eventually it might still go, but it was not cut. And in exactly that, probably not even acre of forest that was left, the exact same little population of this Justicia was there. We found it again, and it was fruiting. And they were fruiting, so we collected a few specimens. We left as much as possible, collected a few bits, and sent them to Ian Derbyshire, so we hopefully can have it now described as a new species, which everybody thinks that it is. So that would be the second endemic of the mountain. And these are some of the forests on the higher parts of the mountain. Very, very beautiful and very, very sort of elfin-like trees, covered in mosses, covered in ferns, covered in orchids. I now realize I should have put one more photo in here, where you are in the forest, just absolutely surrounded by ferns. I called it the forest elfin in the elven forest. And this is another special that only occurs in these forests. Most of these Inselbergs in Mozambique all have an endemic species of Rampholion, a tiny little dwarf chameleon, and there's one in the Vumba. And there's also one on Mount Gornongosa, Ramfoli on Gornongosa. What you see on the left is the female, and the female is probably about 5-6 centimeters, about that big, I would say. What you see on the left, sitting on the knuckle of my finger, is the male. The male is only about a third of the size. It's only about 2-3 centimeters long, and half of that is his nose. And they mostly during the day scurry around the forest floor. You hardly ever see them. It's really hard. And I remember when we lived in Navumba, the species in Navumba, we always could find it most easily at night, because then they climb up into a vine, sort of at eye level, and we had lots of vines in our garden, and we used to have like several of these chameleons climb up into these vines, and we only had to go out with a torch at night to show our clients. We had a little guest house there. Show our clients these chameleons, the other species that we had in the Navumba, because they turn completely white. Because they think, like, well, when I'm going to sleep, I don't need all this strange color changing business. Forget about that, turn it off. And they just turn white, so you could just find them very easily.
Do they only turn white at night?
Sorry?
Do they only turn white at
They
night?
turn white at night when they're asleep. As soon as you shine the torch on them, they wake up, they start coloring again. But they were very easy to find. And then once you are through those slopes up to about 1700 meters, you get onto these beautiful areas of montane grasslands and rocky outcrops and little patches of forest still, where there's beautiful orchids growing and where there's lots of other stuff growing, tree ferns and all that, and lots of strelitzias among those rocks, and ericas there among those rocks. Beautiful areas there. And in the shelter of these rocks and these little patches of forest, in 2006 I found another species that I thought did not look like anything it was supposed to look, and there was a book on there was a monograph on the impatiens of Africa, and nothing in it looked like what it was supposed to be. I actually found specimens of this in the herbarium in Harare, and they were there under a completely different name, and the flowers of that other species that they were named don't look anything like that, so I thought this must be something new. At that point I was still not much into taxonomy myself, so I gave the specimens to some people I knew in the institute in Belgium who were working with these with the impatiens, and asked them, what do you think? And they said, like, well, it doesn't look like anything we know. It is probably something new, but we need new material. So what did we do? In 2011, we got a car from Zimbabwe and with Mark Hyde, and we drove to Mozambique for a couple of days, and I climbed up the mountain and collected some more material. Petra and Mark just hid in some little hotel somewhere because it was pouring with rain the whole time, and they were way too afraid the car would get stuck. And I came back with some more material, and eventually it got described, and they named it after me. So that was very nice of them. So that's Impatiens woersteni, it's now called, and that's the third endemic, the true endemic we have on the mountain. There might be more, but they might be disappearing or might have disappeared before we ever get a chance to describe them. So these top plateaus, where we mostly camped when we did. This is your brother by the tent there, and I have another picture where I took the same picture at night.
Yeah.
Thank you. Any questions?
When are we going to Gornongosa?
Well, not before April because it's closed.
That's fine, we've got time to say.
Bart, you mentioned that it hasn't been isolated for long enough for a lot of endemics to develop. What's the reason for that? Is it a relatively recent upheaval, or what's the origin of Gornongosa? Is it volcanic or?
It's all these Inselbergs are kind of volcanic. They're not like full volcanoes themselves, but they have been pushed up. And either Gorongosa did that at a later stage, or there was more of a bridge between Gorongosa and the border highlands of Zimbabwe for a longer time than, for instance, with Mount Namuli or Mount Mabu or Ribaue, which are all these big Inselbergs in the north of Mozambique that are much further away from adjacent areas. You see it a little bit still with Mount Namuli. Mount Namuli has a few more endemics, but also still has connections with species that occur on Mount Mulanje in Malawi and also occur on Mount Namuli. But Mount Mabu and Ribaue and Ciperone, they are not even, they're smaller mountain areas than this, and they have a few more endemics and less connection because there is just nothing nearby that it could have been connected to at any time, and this probably has been more or less a bridge has been there between those two areas. I actually found that some of the endemics that are considered quite rare in the border highlands turned out to, previously at least, turned out to be fairly common here, more common than they were in the Vumba and the younger areas.
I want to know whether the reserve is fenced and is the mountain outside the fence? How far is the mountain from
It
the
is.
body of the reserve?
It's not fenced. The park is not fenced. It has a bit of a natural border with the escarpment on both sides, but yeah, animals can go up and down and can get into it, and that's so. No, it's not fenced. What we have, the protection we have now is largely dependent on a good relationship that has been built up with most of the, if not all, the surrounding communities, um, economically and socially, and also a very good and very solid uh, uh, anti-poaching and protection control. So there are many fish guys, we call them, many rangers that have been trained, all from the surrounding areas, that have been trained, are now working and having an income from that, and are establishing and maintaining these relationships as well. So it's not fenced. The mountain actually is quite a bit outside of the rest of the park. And that whole area in between is more or less densely populated, and especially the whole area around the mountain is very densely populated because obviously it has a higher rainfall because of the mountain. B, it has fertile soils that were all forested or wooded before, and it also has all these rivers coming off that provide water most of the time, uh, mostly throughout the year for these people that live there. So people have been living there and are slowly moving up. One of the reasons that has become more serious is, as I said, for about 10 years we were not able to even go to the mountain, and a lot of people actually fled off the mountain because the Renamo soldiers were back there. And but that whole initial conservation attempts that we did with the communities around the mountain just evaporated because we weren't there anymore, and the people were hungry, and when they could still go there and still be there, all they could do was do more slash and burn agriculture and go further and further up the mountain to either do subsistence farming, or when you got higher up, that you could grow a few things there that were of small commercial value, like potatoes do pretty well on those higher areas. Banji, like marijuana, do pretty well on those higher mountains, so, which is a source of income as well, of course. And then one or two other things that they do. One of the projects that is going on now, but it's only very limited success is we have coffee. We have people are encouraged to grow coffee. We try to get coffee plantations as a sort of a buffer, uh, uh, and this coffee is all the money that comes out of that is all for the local people, for the people there, which obviously has a greater commercial value than potatoes or even banji. So we hope to do that. It's also a permanent thing. It's not just slash and burn agriculture that you have to like clear forest for again and again. Um, and they're trying a few other things like that as well to hopefully stop cutting. There's reforestation projects going on as well, but it's all very limited. And to be perfectly honest, to some extent, I think it's too late as well. I mean, we might still be able to save some of it. It's so fragmented now that even natural causes can now do big damage to a forest that was previously protected from that, like fire and wind and things like that.
Like observation only, Herbia doesn't seem to be doing well in most places. If you take Marga, you take Gornongosa, you take northern South Africa. Yet here, it's just
Here it's doing very well.
yeah. So what's the story elsewhere?
Well, as I said, uh, Fedobia depends on this seasonal flooding. That they actually want that seasonal flooding because that's how their whole cycle is built on it. And the reason why, for instance, in Manapools, Fedobia is not doing well is because there is much less of a seasonal flooding system in Manapools because of the Kariba Dam than there used to be previously. So that is one reason why it's not doing very well, and also the very healthy and rich population of elephants will probably almost stop any seedling from getting to any reasonable size. So you still have lots of old trees in Manapools that are either at the end of their lifespan or are still doing well, but there's very little new renewal of younger trees. I think for one reason or another that might also be the case in Gonorrhoeas. But here there are so many alternatives for the elephants to use that they don't they're not particularly looking at the Fedobias. Um, and also um, the elephant population is healthy and is good in Gornongosa, but it's still not at a level where you could say there are possibly too many. Like in a lot of other areas in Zimbabwe, Botswana, and even in South Africa, we have these problems that they are reaching sort of the maximum capacity with elephant populations or even going over it. We don't have that problem yet. Anything else? Yep.
I'm sure tonight we're going to put our heads on a pillow and think, "Ooh, I should have asked this and that."
Yes, well, you can find me on iNaturalist. You can find me on Facebook. My email is on the Zimbabwe Flora website. You're most welcome to ask any question at any time that comes up.
I have a question for the third E. And the question is, are there endemic ferns either in Gornongosa or on the mountain?
On the mountain we have Australian Mozambican, that's still there. And otherwise not so much. Australian Mozambican is widespread. Localized.
What was the other one? There was Mozambicense and was it Toro? No, something like that. It was also a Portuguese name. I can't remember now what it was. All right.
Thank you very much.
You are most welcome.
Very interesting.
How do I turn this off? Stop sharing.
All right, thank you very much for interesting talk and small gift from us, and we hope to see you again
Yes.
sometime soon.
Yes. Next one will be about Angola.
We do need the walking encyclopedia, and yeah.
Thank you very much.
Well, okay.
Mense ons is klaar, julle kan nou drink en eet. Petra, don't you just want to come and stand here, please? I just want to take a picture for the records.
Hierso.
Nee, langs die skerm wat ons mors in die maan.
You don't have to talk, dear. Don't worry.
One, two, three, smile. Thank you.
Young labour, I'm a veterinarian, I'm talking to the guys, working on poisonous plants. But